sometimes
Right.
forgotten to start it. So
I'm
with
glad.
that, we welcome Dr. Pat Taylor Ellison. She's a member of St. John, and but she's studied or worked a fair bit in South Africa, and so I wanted to have someone who could kind of help us understand South Africa from kind of our level where we come from it, where we would come at it, and then we'll kind of move to. She has some friends from South Africa as well. I know Tiffany might be adding a few things, and I know like there's other folks here, like priors, for example, who've been to Africa as well and might have some stories to share. So with that, I'll just kind of turn it over. I might mute you to kind of keep background noise from kind of crowding in. So if you want to add a comment, you'll have to unmute yourself and take it from there. Okay, so with that, I think you should be able to share, Pat, as you need to.
Thank you. Thanks for inviting me today. I'm not a deep student of South African history, but since 2005, the institute I used to work at has been engaged with South African congregations, and I've learned a lot. If you want to know more about that and how I came to visit there 4 or 5 times, ask me later about this little beaded pin I'm wearing, and I can give you some of the background. I've organized this morning's hour into 3 sections. I've got a few PowerPoint slides to show you. I'll narrate. The first section will be about basically the history of South Africa from 50,000 feet, very quickly in 7 minutes, the entire 300-year history, but so that you can see what the underpinnings of apartheid were, and how easy it was to build the system of apartheid. Because what we're looking at here are systems of injustice. So I looked at it from a structural viewpoint. So I'll show you that. I'll do 6 or 7 or 8 minutes, and then we'll do conversation together about that. Then we'll move to the second segment, which was once the party came to power that wanted to do apartheid, what they did and how they made it a systemic structural system. And then we'll talk a little more after that in conversation mode like this. And then I'll reserve the last 10 minutes or something where we can talk about what it's like there today and what people are kind of doing to overcome the structural problems of apartheid. So, and I'm going to be saying it apartheid because that's the way the word is in Afrikaans. So if that sounds strange to you, I'm just trying to be as natural with the actual word as I can be. So are we ready to go? Okay, here we go. I'm going to go a little bit fast, but remember, there'll be lots of time for questions. Oh, and Tiffany, thank you for being here today, because Tiffany spent a whole year of her college career in the Cape Town area at the University of the Western Cape. So, she's going to pitch in too. Thanks for being here. Okay, let's see. Here we go. Look at that. It's working. All right. Let's say you own a business. Let's say you have the normal startup woes. You move slowly toward success, and then something comes along, which is your big chance, but there's giant obstacles in the way. If you can do a workaround to those obstacles and save your business's future, you're going to run ahead and do that. And then you get success, expansion, and wealth. Well, that is exactly how South Africa started. The Dutch East India Company, which in Dutch is the VOC, was working in the 1600s. And if you follow my little cursor here, we're going to take the point of view of the Dutch East India Company. Here's Holland up here, right? Up in Northern Europe. They were trading with India, Indonesia, China. It was a long way, and there was no good overland route, so they went by ships. And they came back, and they came back around the Cape of Good Hope, and every time they sailed by, they said, man, it would be nice to have a port down there. A port where we could supply our ships with citrus fruit, grains, we could load and unload. Wouldn't that be handy, because we have this long trip back up here to Holland. So one of those trips, they came and they stopped and they decided to claim the land for their own. Now, just so you know, South Africa today encompasses the whole southern coast of Africa, the continent of Africa. It has some cut-ins here where there are native lands, and then Namibia kind of comes down in a big slice. But the whole country is about the size of 2 Texases. Is that a word? Anyway, just so you kind of have a feeling for what we're talking about. Okay, back to the aerial view. In 1652, they land. They make friends with the Khoikhoi native people. They tell them, we want to come here. We want to get fresh food and water. We need laborers. And for a while, the Khoikhoi served their purposes. So here's the Dutch, here's the Khoikhoi. But after a while, the Khoikhoi stopped trading with them. I'm not exactly sure why. As I say, I don't know the ins and outs of the history, but then they figured, well, we're going to put some Dutch farmers in there. We're going to tell them what to do. And then they're going to raise the crops and run the settlement and serve the port. And they did bring a few people in, but they needed more laborers than that. So in 30 years' time, they had a bunch of Dutch freemen who became the farmers. They also took in some French Huguenots. They were the Calvinist Protestants who were being burned at the stake regularly by the Catholic king and his court. So the Huguenots were very eager to get somewhere else safer, and they brought their wine vines with them. And if you've ever had Stellenbosch wines, you understand the value of the Huguenots' contribution to South African society then and now. There were some German Lutherans too, but to do the labor on their voyages around the Cape, they picked up Indians, Indonesians, some of whom were eager to leave their crowded countries and come as indentured service, but some just as slaves. So by the time they had, maybe 300 European settlers, there were 71,000 Indians, Indonesians, and so on. I hope you're getting a little picture now of the roots of the differences in eventual South African culture. Also, at the same time, a new language was born, Afrikaans. Afrikaans is, I can understand it because I've been there so many times now, but it's a blend of German, Dutch, Xhosa, French. It's kind of a patois that happens when a bunch of cultures try to learn Dutch, which is really a hard language to learn. So Afrikaans was born, and when a language is born, a culture grows up around it, a culture from many nations. All the way from 1688 through the entire 1700s, they brought the church with them. The Dutch Reformed Church was the mother church of the country. They made the rules. And in Dutch Reformed society, slaves could be baptized, but they couldn't be members of the church. The membership in the church was restricted to the white settlers. The French Huguenots and the German Lutherans had their own congregations. I'm not sure what their rules were at the time, but in the Dutch Reformed Church, slaves, they were eager to tell the gospel to the slaves. They just weren't eager to have them as members of the congregations. So they're building this whole society. It's going very well. The farming is going well. The wine growing is going very well. The ships are being supplied. It was so functional that the British saw it and said, we want that. So they took it. They went right down to South Africa, and after 144 years of Dutch control, they took everything. They took over supplies, the settlement, they controlled the language. Afrikaans was outlawed. They displaced all the farmers and moved them inland over the course of the next 100 years. And they were in for 100 years of solid British Empire rule. This did not sit well with the Dutch. They were ticked off. Through the 1800s, this is what South Africa looked like. The Dutch migration, the farmers were migrating away from the port region in covered wagons. It's called the Great Trek. There was a gold rush and a diamond rush. Slaves were emancipated by the British Empire in 1838, but then of course there was a labor shortage by 1860 and they imported more Indians from India. There were frontier wars with the Xhosa, the Zulu, and others. There was cattle rustling. There was small frontier towns. What does this sound like to you? Gunsmoke. That's what it sounds like. You could put almost any episode of Gunsmoke right there in the heart of South Africa and it would have worked. They had sheriffs, just think about it, through the whole 1800s. All of this time, the church was active as well. The Dutch Reformed Church, in principle, agreed that discrimination on the basis of skin color was probably not a good thing. But by 1857, they'd established separate worship services for Blacks and coloreds, that was mixed race people. And this is in their documentation, because of the weakness of some. And 30 years later, less than 30 years later, they had established sub-denomination. So the white church, the Black or Native or African church, and the church for colored people. 3 separate denominations as a family of denominations in the Dutch Reformed Church. Okay, the Dutch never took to British rule. They lived under it, but they didn't like it. So they decided to fight back. And we had the Boer Wars. Boer is the Afrikaans word for peasant or farmer, right? The Boer Wars. And they won the first one, but there was a second. The British came back. They built concentration camps for Boer women and children, which demoralized their husbands who were doing the fighting. This is what the Boer fighters look like, pretty much guerrilla fighters in jeans, basically, versus the organized British army. So the Second Boer War, the British won handily. And the result of the Boer Wars was a clampdown on the 4 states where the rebellion was the strongest. Blacks could not vote. There was a 1913 Native Lands Act that established basically what we would call reservations for the Native Africans. In 1934, the British made South Africa a fully sovereign state, and they took their governor back to Great Britain. But their government was overseen by the British until 1961. Just think about that. Just think about that. So there's my history of South African structure and the little things we can see as precursors to their government in the 20th century. Let's go back to the full screen of people's faces now, and let's ask some questions and talk about things for, let's say 5-10 minutes or so. What do you see? What are you hearing? What are you noticing?
So you have to stop your share.
I have to stop my share. So I do that by doing what? Stop share. Thank you.
There we go.
See, this is good. Just be my backseat driver, Pastor Eric.
There you
What
go.
do you see? What do you see? What do you hear? And unmute yourself if you have a question.
If you have a question and you're not sure how to unmute yourself, raise your hand and I'll click on the ask you to unmute, which will help make it easier to unmute.
You're unmuted.
Yes, Pat, this is Alan. This sounds like America, but what happened here in the States about slavery and all.
I'm glad you said that.
It sounds very similar to me, it does. And I guess, the British did the same thing to the Dutch here in the United States. They took over the colony that the Dutch had in New York. They just came in and took it.
Yeah, they were good at that, apparently. Really good at it.
Right. At the same time, actually, I think.
I think so. It was, South Africa was landed on and claimed by the Dutch 50 years after Jamestown was settled. So yeah, it's in the same time period.
Right. Right. Very
What
good.
else? What else? Yeah, what else are you noticing?
Native American reservations.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
They never know what to do with the people whose land they stole, so they just put them somewhere. What else are you noticing? How about the church?
Separation of church and yeah, the colors and the blacks and the whites, they all had their own church.
That's right. And I've always been, I've asked my South African friends what it meant when they said because of the weakness of some. Was it the weakness of the people of color? Would they be tempted toward the white life or something? Or what was it the weakness of the white people for the people of color? I've never gotten an answer for that. I'm sure maybe Tiffany studied that as she studied the formation of apartheid, but I don't know. Tiffany, do you have an answer for that one?
Well, I can't say that specific thing, to say for sure, but the overview would be the weakness of the colors. Like, because I mean, even when I was there in the mid 90s, I met someone and he was just so matter of fact, like, well, we can't, trust the blacks and give them power because their hair is curly. And if you can put a pencil through the hair, then obviously they're not smart. Like that was literally in the mid 90s. And I don't like, we have similar ingrained thoughts here, right? With racism and everything, but it was for that, like not being worthy. So we don't want to integrate, right? We want to keep ourselves separate.
Yeah.
I would say in America we have kind of the same thing, and the thing that kind of merges it together is natural law theory. Just that this is the way life is, quote unquote. This is the way it's supposed to be.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah,
that benefits the people in power.
It certainly does.
It
Certainly does. It always does, Elwood says. Yeah, that's right. Well, it's pretty easy to take some pot shots at somebody else's culture. So it's kind of nice to start with South Africa, but I'm glad you're seeing the parallels there. We can feel all smug and superior to them, but we started at the same time and under many of the same conditions, as Alan points out. So, well, I'll tell you what, let's move on. Unless someone else has a question or a discussion point right now, and let's move on to see how apartheid got instituted. So other questions before we do that?
One quick question. So
Yeah.
with the Indian people then that they had picked up along the way, they just kind of were thrown in with the blacks? Or was
Yes,
that
you'll
their
see
choice?
that in a minute. They have their own classification under apartheid.
Okay.
There were 4 classes of people, and Indian was its own class, but
Okay.
they weren't treated much better than anyone else of color because of their color.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's a great question.
Thank you.
The largest population of Indians outside India is in South Africa. Yeah, a lot of them came into Durban because that's on the Indian Ocean coast. And so that they still have you'd be much more likely to get curry as a street food in Durban than you would in Cape Town, for example. But I mean, there are Indians throughout the country.
Sure.
Yeah, good question. All right, I'm going to go back to share my screen now. We'll look at a few more slides if that's okay. Let's go back here. Okay, so after the Boer Wars, after Britain takes control back, even the Afrikaners had it for a year or so, and it got taken back again. Once again, this is South Africa, about the size of 2 Texases. Here's the map of South Africa now, just so you see what it's like. Here's Durban, where a lot of the Indians came in. There are universities all over the country. There's sophisticated life all over the country. Bloemfontein and the interior were more rural, although diamonds were discovered in Kimberley. So a lot of commerce was happening, you know, close to the diamond mines, and then gold was discovered between Kimberley and Johannesburg. But it has three capitals: Pretoria, Bloemfontein, and Cape Town. And you can see the wonderful natural harbor down here in Cape Town. That's where the first landing point was. The country is gorgeous. Another time, both Tiffany and I can show you slideshows of great things to do and see in South Africa, but that's not what today's about. But I think we'd be happy to do it, right, Tiffany? Oh, she's
Yeah,
yeah.
and Scott and Amy.
Scott and Amy, great. Oh, we might have to have a South Africa party. That's what we'll do. Okay. All right. So after years of lost control, the National Party of South Africa won big in the elections in 1924. These were the Afrikaners and other English-speaking whites. And they began to architect their view of the perfect South African society until World War II broke out. And then their party was split over whether or not to enter World War II. So they lost the election that year. But then in 1948, right after the war, they won again big time by promising to establish apartheid. And apartheid is an Afrikaner word, the H-E-I-D, hate or hate, means ness or shun, T-I-O-N. So it's just, it makes a noun out of something else, right? So this means apartness. You can see why they called it that. It's what they had been doing for years, especially in the church, right? And if the church does something, it kind of gets a, this is okay stamp on it. So they promised to establish apartheid and support for working class Afrikaners. Okay, I could go back at that slide, but I think you noticed all those people sitting in that picture were white, and all but one of them was male. Okay, right away in 1949, they started legislating, and for the next 5 years especially, they passed a lot of laws. The first big one was the Prohibition of Mixed Marriages Act in 1949. That's pretty self-explanatory. You couldn't go across racial lines to marry. Then they added to that the Immorality Amendment Act, which made it illegal to cross racial lines to socialize or marry. And if you join us in the book club, reading Trevor Noah's book, Born a Crime, that's why his mom and he couldn't hold hands in the street, because he was a mixed race kid and she was Black. So just, this is how it gets lived out. Then there was the Population Registration Act in 1950. And here's where you get your 4 classifications of people. You were classed as Black, as white, as colored, or as Indian. There it is, right in the law. They did the classification every year. Can you imagine? So signs started to go up. This was in a public park, but it said, for use by white persons, these public premises and the amenities thereof, you know, bathrooms, drinking fountains and stuff, have been reserved for the exclusive use of white persons by order of the provincial secretary. It's there in English and it's there in Afrikaans. More legislation ensued in the coming years. There was the Group Areas Act of 1950. That told you where you could live depending on your classification. There was a Separate Representation of Voters Act of 1951. That told you whether you could vote or if you had to vote by representative. There was the Natives Act of 1952, which was called the Abolition of Passes Act, but what it really was a coordination of other identity documents. So all non-white people had to travel at all times with documents. Then there was the Industrial Conciliation Amendment Act of 1956, That told you where you could work. There were 25 major laws passed between 1950 and 1975, and hundreds of sub-laws and ordinances depending on the city you lived in and the work opportunities and so on. I want you just to see this next sign. Can you read that?
Yeah. Armed guards shoot on sight.
Yeah, natives, Indians, and colors, if you enter these premises at night, you will be listed as missing. Armed guards shoot on sight. Savage dogs devour the corpse. You have been warned. So that little yellow sign, which we were objecting to 30 seconds ago, now that looks pretty polite compared to this. People were classified yearly by use of pencils in the hair, as Tiffany said, or combs, by calipers to measure the width of your nose, by a number of means, skin color and so on. And because they were classified every year, sometimes your classification changes. So here in 1984, the year before my daughter was born, right? This is recent. 518 colored people were redefined as white. 2 whites were redefined as Chinese. 1 white was reclassified as Indian. 1 white became colored, and 89 colored people became African or Black. Sort of amazing. Okay, but this is, in order to, I just want to say parenthetically, if you're gonna arrange a society so that it supports these values, you have to have extensive legislation and then a means of enforcing it, right? Otherwise, how are you going to keep it up? Now, telling you where you could live. You could live in a township, and the townships, I've been in the townships, they're affordable, more or less decent housing. This one is near Durban. This one is Motherwell near Port Elizabeth. But let me just show you one near Johannesburg, and you'll see something amazing. Can you see that? This is Kia Sands near Johannesburg. This is the white neighborhood. It's gated. The gates have broken glass and barbed wire on the top of them. This is the township. So the same number of people that live in this little tiny segment of this suburb in Joburg would be crowded into this little place here in the township. Now, townships do have sewage, water systems in them. They have electricity. They have cell phone towers. I mean, they've got the basic amenities of life, but it's just really different living conditions. And you can see they're separated by a 2-lane road. That's mostly because a lot of the people who live here work over here as domestics. If you're not lucky enough to be told you can live in a township, then you're kind of condemned to what they euphemistically call informal settlements, which are squatter camps, basically, with homes put together with anything they can find. This is Dunoon near Cape Town. And this is Dunoon. I mean, it just goes on forever. And about every 5 or 10 blocks, there is a well or a water pump and a latrine and a shower building. And then there'll be another one over here. And then there'll be another one back over here. So a good deal of your time is spent fetching water, basically. And they do try to keep up and build enough of the townships for people to live in. But as soon as the squatter camps are emptied, they get a lot of immigrants in South Africa from Central Africa, and that they fill up again. I'll have a slide about that a little later, but. Yeah, so maybe let's go back to conversation.
Where was the church in all of this? Was there anyone that was speaking out? Was there any kind of efforts to begin to make a change?
Yeah, you'll see that. You'll see that
Okay.
in a lot of white Afrikaner pastors joined the movement to try to topple apartheid back in the early 80s. And they were joined by pastors from the colored and Black churches as well. So there was a kind of unification going on amongst the agitators who wanted apartheid to fall. But as a church body, the Dutch Reformed Church didn't work on that too much.
A question, how, to understand the government, I mean, how are these legislators chosen? How long? I mean, how are these rules made, or are they indefinite? I don't understand how this all works.
They were laws enacted like American laws. Once you enact a law, you don't expect it to be removed. But in the end, when apartheid fell, the laws were dismantled. But these are just politicians that are elected from the general populace. But if you prevent Blacks from voting, and if you have the colored mixed race people voting by representative, let's say, I don't know a lot about how that worked, but the white majority gets its way.
What amazes me about all those laws, Pat, is that they are, and I'm not saying America's better, but I'm just saying they're happening at the same time that America is dismantling slowly some of its own racial inequity, or at least legislatively doing so.
That's
And
right.
that registration, that classification thing that happened, those 4 different categories, that's after the Holocaust. I mean, that just, when I saw that, I'm like, holy crap.
Yes,
bad.
there are parallels to the Holocaust, of course. I hope some of you saw that. Even telling people they had to live in a ghetto, you know, a particularly prescribed neighborhood. Yeah, there certainly are parallels there. And many, in 1948, this began as a social system because that party got reelected, saying they were going to put it into place. Just, you know, three years after the Holocaust concentration camps were eliminated.
Wow.
So I looked up the population of South Africa, and one of the statistics is that the white South Africans are only 7.8% of the total population. That's a pretty small number. Pretty small percentage.
It is.
And whatever white means in that culture.
Whatever white means in that culture, because you are right. One of my dear friends there is a Dutch Reformed pastor, Peter Vanderwalt, right? There's a Dutch name for you. But Peter is as dark-skinned as many colored people I know there. But the fact is he had a Roman nose, so he didn't get classified, his family didn't get classified as colored.
Yeah.
And he had a Dutch name, which helped.
Yeah.
But he and a lot of Dutch Reformed pastors who were young and who wanted to be civil rights activists in the United States, but they were South African, they did their civil rights work to try to dismantle apartheid. Yeah.
When did Nelson Mandela become a part of all of this?
He was a political prisoner at that time on Robben Island.
Right.
And he, it was his writings and his general affability and strength in negotiation that had the powers that be designate that he could definitely lead the nation out of apartheid if and when the time came. And they started serious negotiation with him in 1991.
Sure.
Apartheid fell and he was put into office in 1994. And Willie Yonkers and a number of other South African historical scholars have sat with our group and talked with us at length about how what a blessing it was that that coup really was a bloodless coup, because it could have been
Right.
much worse.
Yes, yes. I remember hearing about this, becoming more aware of this when Jimmy Carter was president, apartheid, and
Yeah.
he kind of brought it to our attention. I think he
did, and I think it's because he was a Georgian living in former slave country. He could relate to the Afrikaners, but he realized their system was not going to make them move profitably into the 21st century.
Right.
Yeah.
Are there questions from people who haven't contributed yet who maybe want to ask something or make a comment?
Thank you for that.
Isn't that where Gandhi went to study?
He did.
Democracy or whatever. When was that?
That would have been in probably the 30s and 40s. I don't know for sure. We should look that. Judy, look that up.
Yeah.
Sorry, Elwood, go ahead.
By church or the pastors to love your neighbor and your enemy.
Yeah, we can say that, can't we? Let's see how good we are at that.
Yeah.
Yeah. Especially when, as Tiffany so beautifully said earlier, if you're raised to believe that these people can't think for themselves or will make the wrong decisions and be weak about things and choose the wrong thing, if you're raised to believe that, it takes a bit of re-education to come to any other conclusions. That doesn't mean they shouldn't have done what you say, Fred, but I mean, it does, you sort of see in the whole historical DNA of South Africa why they may think that way.
Yeah.
Tiffany, do you have anything else you want to chime in on this? This is a great time.
Terry, did you have a question?
Go ahead, you go first, Tiff.
Okay, a few things. One, from my experience there, and just to think about it. So I was there as Mandela was president. I got to see him in Cape Town when they celebrated the Constitution, but you can imagine how close it was to to the official system, and that it just looked much different than what Pat's describing. Like the townships all look like the informal settlements. And during that time where the whites lived, there had to be a natural boundary. Like it was that specific, a natural boundary, and then the coloreds, and then a natural boundary, a river, a stream or something, and then the blacks. And generally, like I stayed in my host family in a colored area, and the coloreds and Indians by then were kind of, mixing in that area. And to think of the Jim Crow laws, I kind of think of that, whereas apartheid was official and like stated it, but the Jim Crow laws and the racist policies of redlining and housing, I mean, there's so many similarities, but maybe the US didn't call it an official system and be as stark, but a lot of those things are what we see have brought us to where we are in America, and those same thoughts of, oh, my daughter's writing on the table. Okay, the same thoughts of who is, who is worthy or not.
Right.
Oh, and just it's so fascinating. It can be another one. So there's Gandhi and Bonhoeffer. I know we have a lot of Bonhoeffer folks in our church community, and he studied Gandhi, and Martin Luther King studied Gandhi, and a lot of that work started in South Africa. So there's a lot of richness in, yes, the separateness, but also our faith and people's strength to overcome that in a nonviolent way.
Thanks for that. That's extremely well said, and it'd be a great segue to my last segment here. If there aren't any other questions, or if there are, let's get those bits thrown into the conversation now, and then I'll move ahead. But who's got a point to make or a question to ask?
Well, I think of Africa as being the so-called dark continent. And I think of all of the countries that were taken over and colonized by Britain, the Dutch, and on, French.
Right.
And so forth. When a lot of that began to come apart and nations were getting their independence, say in the early 60s or thereabouts, what effect did all of that have on what was going on in South Africa?
My impression is, Elwood, that it caused them to clamp down tighter. It caused the people of color there to have hope and to maybe act in ways that may have resulted in some more freedom for them. And then that was just squashed. Because these are two different ways of looking at the way you can live your life, right?
And then Terry, did you have a question?
Yeah, this is more a comment. We were talking about how comparing how the people in South Africa grew up and came to really believe, and I think Tiffany gave a great example with the hair, but I'll speak to my own family and my grandma, who I loved dearly. I went fishing with her. She loved horses. She lived a long time. I mean, she just loved her dearly, but I know when I would look in her eye when I came back from the Peace Corps and the working there, and I know some of my cousins married Hispanic people, I could just see she believed they were not equal. And it was just so ingrained in how she was brought up. She just would look at that individual and they just could not equal the people who lived around her. And no matter how much I loved her or what you would say, it was just so deep. So just an example. Thank you.
It's well said, really well said.
Sil, did you have something to add?
Yeah, this is a kind of a human interest thing. I've been in South Africa 3 times. And from 70 to 73, I had my appendix out in Durban, South Africa.
Oh.
I didn't go there to do that, but it happened. I was there visiting. It's a long story, but I survived.
Wow. Well, that's a more adventurous story than I have, I'll tell you that.
I would say, and I've been listening to the conversation here, this is very interesting to look at the inequities in South Africa, in their culture. It only helps us to look at the inequities in our own society, in our treatment of the Native Americans, in our treatment of people from Mexico, in our treatment of Blacks throughout the centuries. We cannot underestimate our own or minimize our own what should I say?
Complicity, participation.
Complicity.
Yeah.
In treating others inequitably.
Right.
The centuries to many different cultures over time, and certainly the way we have treated Blacks, through slavery, and it's taken how many 100 years to overcome that?
Yep.
So
you're so right.
Americans. So, I mean, we really have to look at it through that lens, and we can compare our history with the history of other nations, you know, there are comparisons to be made, but you know, I think we have to keep that in mind when we
Right.
judge other countries.
That's it. That you're exactly right. I think that's one of the reasons for a session like this, so that we can see what someone else did. We can also see what we've done. I think that's exactly right.
If
I
I
want
want
to,
to add something,
yeah,
thanks, Pat. We were just talking, I think, just to reemphasize that point, I think it's kind of easy or tempting to compare the white and black racial issues in South Africa with the white and black issues in the United States. But the better comparison really is whites with Native Americans here. And interestingly, it's just like that just isn't an issue anymore, you know, because Native Americans are now 2%, 3% of the population of the United States, where in its whites are now 8%. They had been 20%, I think, at the peak of apartheid. But for lack of a better word, Europeans in the United States were just much more successful. It's an awful word, but at eradicating the Native Americans.
yes.
We're now, it's just like, that's, of course there's still injustices, but it's kind of secondary, because now we are, like, whites are the dominant population.
Maybe at this moment,
Sure, yeah.
that might change, and all the more reason to get on top of what it is we've done and how we look at sharing life and space with others. Yeah. I want you to know what the church did that helped to topple apartheid. It didn't do much, and it was done by the colored and black churches more than the white church. But I want you to see some hope. So I want to share with you what people I know have been doing there. Let's go back to the slideshow.
Okay.
Yeah, Alan, I'm on the slideshow now. Apartheid ended in 1994, helped by millions of people from all of the apartheid categories, with former political prisoner Mandela as president. Today, the population of South Africa is almost 60 million. But of course, they're still struggling with all the things they built during apartheid, because it takes a long time. You can say this law is no longer in force, but how are you going to even begin to live into that? And they took 3 years to dismantle some of those laws between 1991 and 1994. So there've been lots of committees, task forces, and so on. And how do you even begin to reconcile the harm that was done on all sides of the issue? You have the Truth and Reconciliation Committee led by Desmond Tutu that was operating for 5 years. If you want a hard book to read on that, there's a book called The Country of My Skull by Angie Crook, who is, I think she was a reporter who covered the Truth and Reconciliation meetings. But she loves her country, but she could see how much pain and violence had happened to it, and was hopefully going to come out the other side of this at some point. But they also have a problem with immigration, because South Africa has maybe 20% unemployment, but the rest of Africa has 30 to 40% unemployment, and lots of regimes that are totalitarian. So people are fleeing all the time into those squatter camps that are emptying into townships with plumbing and everything. Then the squatter camps get filled up very, very quickly with immigrants. But that's a big picture of today. I want to show you something that happened in the church. In 1982, something called the Belhar Confession was written in the town of Belhar, just outside of Cape Town, or not far from Cape Town. The Belhar Confession was written by the colored and black churches together, and they declared apartheid a heresy, a religious heresy. You can't believe in Jesus Christ and his love for all humankind and believe in apartheid. They disqualify each other. That's a heresy. Within 4 years, this Bel-Ar Confession was adopted by the two sub-denominations, and they became one. Their congregations are huge. I'm going to show you a picture of a pastor in a few minutes who pastors one of those congregations. But they are now united as the Uniting Reformed Church of South Africa. And the reason they're called the Uniting and not United is they are still hoping to unite with the white church. So they're in process. The Bel-Ar Confession, there's a wonderful book by a guy I know well. I was his next door neighbor for 3 months, Pete Nodia, called the Bel-Ar Confession, Neither Calendar Nor Clock, which is a theological quote some people will recognize. But this Bel-Ar Confession has been adopted by the Reformed Church of Namibia, by the Reformed Church of America, by the PCUSA, Presbyterian Church of America, by the the Reformed Church of Belgium. You might ask, has the white Dutch Reformed Church adopted it? No. They allow its acceptance as voluntary to members who want to accept it. In 2011, my Dutch Reformed pastor friends notified me immediately when the Synod Convention said, we can now start preparing to begin steps to accepting the Bel-Ar Confession. You know, that's talk like church politicians do. We're going to start to think about starting. It's something, right? It's something. And in the meantime, if you're a white family, like my favorite white family of South Africa here, Frederick Murray, descended from those French Huguenots, nice wife, kids, he's a pastor. He's my counterpart in the institute we formed over there. So he does the work I used to do in American congregations. Wonderful people, but how do they live in a future with this kind of legacy in their past? It's a really important question, and they live with it every single day. I want to show you two quick stories of IRCSA pastors, mixed race pastors. This guy is Andrew Esterhazen. He works tirelessly in addition to pastoring a 5,000 member church where all he does every weekend are funerals for AIDS and now COVID. All weekend, because he's got so many members in his congregation in the townships. But he was present. This is a Dutch Reformed church, a white church in the Karoo, a rural area. He was present last October in this church when it decided this white church would unite with the IRCSA church. It was the second white congregation to unite with the colored and black denomination. And he was so excited. He was so excited because this is his life's work. Let's get these churches united as one, as Jesus prays in John 17. If you want this slideshow, you can read the little article that I've put in here. It's too small for you to read, but it is happening over time. The resistance will erode away. Then there's one other guy I want to show you, my friend Stanley Green, who left Durban with his wife when they decided to get married and have a family, and they didn't want to raise their children in the violence of apartheid. So back in the 80s, they moved to the States. Stanley became the director of the Mennonite Mission Network. They joined a peace church because they couldn't stand the violence. And Stanley teaches in very small ways. In the Mennonite Mission Network newsletter, he'll share a recipe, like this nice curry dish in a bread bowl. But then he'll tell where the recipe originated. It came in Durban to be a popular dish for the Indian indentured workers who were working in the sugar fields, so they could carry their hot lunch with them and work at the same time. Or it has another origin story, suggests that it was created during the apartheid era as a way for restaurants to serve excluded people who were denied the use of utensils, and they had to be served from the back door of the restaurant. Now just take that picture with you. They could go to a restaurant, but they had to go to the back door and they were never given utensils. So gentle teaching helps inform people, teach people about the similarities among human beings. Maybe that's the only way people grow and learn to enlarge their perspective. Anyway, I will send this PowerPoint to Pastor Eric and Aaron, and they can share it with anybody who'd like to spend more time with it. One of the ways you encourage businesses is we work with a dozen congregations at a time in a denominational setting at my old institute, and they make a lot of beadwork art in South Africa. And the symbol for our project with congregations is a sailing ship. So they made us just hundreds of these, and every member of a partnership congregation now has a beaded boat from South Africa to remind them of their partners overseas, that and it furnished some income for them. So partly it's who you do trade with and who you lift up in your prayers and that sort of thing. We're close to the end of the time, but I'd be happy to take a question or two. I'm sure, Tiffany, if you want to put in a word or two, you're welcome.
So just a quick note, it's 11:28. We can keep this rolling for a while. I mean, there's no football games to worry about, guys, today until like 5:30. So quick note in case you do need to leave at 11:30. Next Sunday, our adult forum will be my friend Dr. Rothgary returning to do Modern India, caste in Modern India. So if you remember, and you can, I'm pretty sure you can find this on our YouTube channel. I can provide links if you want. He did kind of the history of caste up to modern India, and now he's going to come back. He's going to talk, because caste was abolished in 1948, but it kept going, just like America. And then the following Sunday, a friend of Aaron Frosley's is going to be with us. She wrote a book called Race Ing Fargo, R-A-C-E Ing Fargo. And so she did some sociological studies up here in Fargo on how we handle new immigrants, South Sudanese and Bosnians in particular. So Rothgary is the next Sunday, and I think then we skip a Sunday for President's Day weekend, and then we come back on the last Sunday with Dr. Erickson. So just quick announcements.
Actually, our
we'll get back to
Sunday is the last Sunday. So Dr. Rothgary and then Dr. Erickson, and then we have a Sunday of fellowship.
Cool.
There we go. Thanks, Aaron. I knew something like that. So anyways, hopefully you can join us for that. And if you can't, we're recording them when I remember, and putting them on our YouTube channel eventually. So, and you can always bug me to get them up there faster if you want. So with that, I'll hand it back to Pat and our conversation about apartheid.
Yeah.
So, I have a comment. This is Jim talking. In listening to these, I've appreciated the presentation very much this morning, and in listening to it and trying to determine the parallel with what we experience, it seems to me that our kind of apartheid up here in upper Midwest America is not of the kind that they have. I don't think we have problems with associating with Black people. I think we can be friends with them, we can date them, that kind of thing. We're not afraid of them polluting our water fountains or things like that. I think the big struggle that we have is dollars and cents, which is probably the base part of the way we think as Americans. If Blacks move in around our homes, we are afraid the value of our home will drop or we will have difficulty selling it. We have a feeling about Black people that just in sheer dollars and cents, they are hard on us. What is the feeling of other people on this?
Oh. Take it away. Nobody's.
So I'd have to
Go ahead, and I have a reply from the South African point of view. So go ahead.
I don't know. So we just had a Black family move in a house on our block. And I have not met them yet because.
Well, I'm not from
but Fred
North
has
Dakota.
And
about the value of our property going down.
And we've had friendly discussions with him. I have.
You know, that never even occurred to me that the value of our property would go down. So
I'm going to jump in here. I'm going to try to just navigate a little bit. First of all, Jim, in response to your comment, I think that was partially Scott's comment about, you know, that our in North Dakota, we might find more traction with these ideas when we start to think about our relationship with Native American folks than we do with African American folks per se. And then Ginny, did you have something to add about this as well? About you had done some work on, we did have racial covenants in Fargo for a long time.
Yes, in the Belmont area, and that's the area that our church is in.
Wow.
And I got a copy of the deed, and there it said right away, coloreds cannot move in.
Wow.
And I had to go to the city commission twice, not the city commission, the Human Rights Commission. I went there twice to talk about this. And after a year and a half, they finally made a statement. And of course, it's not rectified now. We would have to call all the deed owners in the area and get their permission to change all the deeds. That would take a lot of lawyers and money. So it's right here in Fargo, this red lining. And so I think you all understand that if Blacks cannot move into certain places, then they don't get to go to the good school, shall we say. And there would be a park with maybe a swimming pool and a museum and a tennis courts. And then these children would not have that opportunity.
Mm-hmm.
And then of course, the Black people they're not able to assemble finance to pass down to the next generation.
Right.
And so they're in constant poverty. So it was just amazing to find out that it's right here in Fargo. Actually, right near the church, Tim Mathern, Senator Mathern's home, his property had red lining. Yes.
Yeah.
Really? I mean, where was that, Jenny? That Blacks could not buy a house.
Just one deed that I found, and Lindenwood Drive, you know, with that gate, you would go through that gate and along the river. That's where the Blacks could not live. But it's really unlikely that that would be a problem now because the city owns that land for flood control. So it's vacant now.
Interesting.
So any other questions about or comments about the slides that Pat had presented us or about South Africa? We've still got Scott and Amy here. I think Tiffany's still here. So any questions for them specifically about that, or anyone else have, like Diane, I know you lived in Africa a bit, but not South Africa, for example, but any other questions or comments for them?
So
Elwood, you're muted, but go ahead, Judy.
I'm wondering, usually during a revolution or an upheaval, the artists of the nation, visual arts, and other arts, culture, will sort of reflect what's going on. When you spent time down there, did you see any of this in the arts?
Yeah, Tiffany would have been there right after it happened. She would have an even stronger pulse for that. But I can say arts are helpful in coming around to the other side of this. And my South African friends, including the pastor, the Frederick Murray and his white wife and kids, that guy does projects called story walls all over South Africa, where they get a group of a mixture of people and they build walls with art and words that are their stories. And so in a sense, he's continuing the work of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, because people can hear and see suffering, joy, etc., that's coming as a result of being free from apartheid. I would love Frederick to come and be with our adult forum one morning. He's willing to do that. So that would be an interesting set of stories to hear. But I'm sure Tiffany has some examples of art that was popular when she was there in the mid-90s, right after the fall.
Yeah, what comes to mind especially is the music. And there's just amazing musical artists in South Africa. And much like in other countries that suffer colonization and people, you know, without power, music is a great force of connection and strength, and the storytelling that way. And for example, my group, we studied at the University of the Western Cape, which was the colored university. So I was like, our little group was the only whites in the university. And we were taught the language Xhosa, which is clicking, and they taught us to sing the South African national anthem. And we did that in a semi-trailer in the township, because they were like, that was a way of expressing art and connection, was to have your own radio station. So we were doing that out of they were putting that together out of a semi-trailer in the township. It's come a long way, you know, since then, but that's a natural human spirit, is to express and to share your story. And finally their voice, and by they I mean people without power, our brothers and sisters who had been put down, were sharing their voice where they were at.
Oh, it's a great story.
Other questions or comments about apartheid or about your own experience? Questions, comments?
Well, I would say this is Kathy. I can't turn my visual on. I'm from the South originally, and I moved here 40 years ago. And I remember when I moved here, there were no Blacks in Fargo, literally. And I thought, you know, how could anyone be prejudiced toward Black?
I know we're losing Kathy, it sounds like.
Years ago. But I had a friend who had an adopted daughter who was Korean, and her saying that her daughter felt prejudice toward her at South High. And I thought, gosh, I was
Kathy. I mean, there
version, but I'm thinking about the fact that it's Super Bowl Sunday, and football comes as a result of that. And I remember as a kid watching football, and they were a big deal because at one point it was believed that it was actually, I remember being vocalized by announcers that Black athletes were not smart enough to be quarterback. And it's amazing how, and even with coaching in the NFL, there's a rule that requires teams to now interview Black coaches to try to fight against. It's amazing how culturally we find ways to language things or to build systems that work to repress those who are on the margins, and how that's reinforced through language and thought.
Good observation, especially on Super Bowl Sunday.
Super Bowl Sunday.
I want to share from Kathy's comment too that you all know Aiden, and he has been bullied at school he's adopted from South Korea. And this isn't 40, 60 years ago. This is, England and Dilworth right now. So those separating ourselves by what we look like and others, we have to keep working to overcome that. And I think Scott's point about the Native Americans, when I listen to Kathy and others, well, we don't have many, people with Black skin living here, but there's Native Americans living in reservations all this time, and just like so far and out of mind that we tend to forget, just like the townships were meant to do, keep it out of mind, and then we don't have to think about those people who are really our brothers and sisters in Christ. And then we want to put our land, we want the power though to go through their land for oil and everything else. And then we're seeing that in our area now. That has some connections.
One of the things we'll enjoy when the book club takes up the Trevor Noah book, Born a Crime, is the power of humor, just like the power of the arts. When you're going to fight against something, if you have a humorist, Trevor Noah took over The Daily Show when Jon Stewart retired. And I thought, man, this is a guy now who can tell us what we really look like, because he's from South Africa, from Soweto, the township outside Johannesburg. He lived through tremendous bigotry and so on. And now he's in America. What kind of commentary will he bring? And it's been fantastic. This book is well worth the read.
And that book club, we meet on Monday nights at 7 and Tuesday afternoons at 1. And we're going to start Trevor Noah here in a couple Mondays. So I think the 22nd of February, that Monday, that Tuesday, right in there. And then the other plug I'll put in is for the book Cast. If you haven't gotten a copy of that yet, let us know. We're happy to get one to you. Fantastic read. She does a wonderful job of laying it all out. We have in Lent a couple different options for Bible studies. A couple of them are with the book Cast, which Aaron is holding up. And if you want a copy, just let Aaron know, because we got a couple donations, and so we're gonna get those out to people if they want them.
Well, go ahead.
Jim and John, we'd like to have a copy if we could to use to read. So if we can get it, why, we'd appreciate it.
Aaron gave you a thumbs up.
Yep, I'll get you one, Jim.
Well,
okay, thank you.
Thanks so much for this. I'll be happy to stay online if you have more questions or comments, but I can also recommend, if you don't know anything about South Africa and you've never read this book, Cry the Beloved Country by Alan Payton. It's an old book. You probably have read it, but reread it. It's a story between the races of the terrible tragedy of people trying to live in this kind of separated culture. Cry the Beloved Country.
Pat, earlier you mentioned about the relationships with the Reformed Church and the Presbyterian Church and adopting that resolution.
The Belhar? Yeah.
I did not hear any mention of Lutheran churches.
I don't know that they have. It went through all the Calvinist churches, as a proposal. So I don't know if the Lutherans have picked it up or not. But I know, Elwood, you would like Pete Nodia's book. It's called Neither Calendar Nor Clock.
Oh,
by Pete Nodia.
All right.
And it's about the Belhar Confession, but it takes it into 4 different categories: theology and practice and so on. I think you'd really enjoy it.
Pete?
Nodia, N-A-U-D-E with an accent. N-A-U-D-E.
Okay. And the title again?
Neither calendar nor clock.
Neither calendar or clock. Thank you.
You bet. Well, my husband Mike has sat through this whole thing too. That's pretty good. He's still here.
Yeah. And you're still married.
Yeah.
I haven't checked on that. Any other questions or comments for the good of the order here? Well, I want to thank Tiffany for being present with us, because she certainly has direct experience and right about the time that everything got lifted. And of course, the main social systems are still well in place. But she made friends there. I made friends as I worked there. My journeys took me back and forth, I think, on 5 separate trips, working with congregations across the spectrum. And I can't, it's something I never would have learned or experienced if I hadn't been there. So I'm grateful to all those people for teaching me. That is essentially what the people who in South Africa who want to learn how to be different say. If they're going to give themselves a pat on the back, they say this: we're teachable.
Oh, wonderful.
It's wonderful.
Yep. Thanks, Pat. And just so you guys understand, I am actually planning on having like Pete Murray come and other folks. I've kind of structuring the year where we spend the first parts of the year looking more at the history and the systems and kind of the facts. And then the second part of the year, we're going to look more at experiences, people's direct experiences. For some of us, we just want to jump into the experiences because we're totally comfortable with with understanding the systems of racism and inequality. But there are others of us who are still learning. So we're kind of baby stepping our way up there. So that, just so you guys understand the methodology here, that's kind of the way. So we will have other folks who come in and share their own direct experiences, which I think will be really valuable. So, but I appreciate everyone's time and commitment to this. It's fun when we see new faces at our adult forums, and that's why I want to keep on plugging. We're hoping to get a variety of perspectives in. So keep paying attention to what's coming up. And if you have any ideas, that's the other thing. If you have any ideas, please let me know. Be happy to incorporate more diverse perspectives.
Body of Christ given for you.
So thank you guys again. Thank you, Pat and Tiffany and Scott. Thank you all for your comments and questions. If you have any other things, feel free to email me or Aaron, and we'll do our best. All right.
This has been a wonderful morning. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yep. Thanks, Elwood.
Thank you, Elwood.
Thank you,
I
Pat.
was there to be able to worship in person at the worship service this morning, which was exhilarating. And now
Yes.
this frosting
you,
on the
Pat.
cake, you might say.
Thank you. You're welcome.
Morning.